Erin is a graduate of the University of Michigan College of Engineering as an undergraduate and has a business degree from Harvard School of Business. If you heard of it, it's the Michigan of the East, right? And she has worked at some of the leading companies, many of which you use on a daily basis or are very familiar with. Twitter being one of them, Path, Quora, and now at Yahoo. In her role at Yahoo, she is Director of Product Management. And we'll get into a little bit about what that means and what's entailed in product management. And she has traveled the world, especially in Asia, as technology has just been booming over the last few years. And just came back from Paris and Barcelona. And so she has just a global perspective on what's happening in technology, both in Silicon Valley, here in the United States, and around the world. I'd like you all to join me in welcoming Erin to the University of Michigan. Good to have you here. So it's a little bit of a homecoming, right?
It's good to be back. I think it's been like 3 years since I've actually been on campus, and officially 10 years since I graduated. I graduated when I was 7, so.
Seriously, no.
So it's good to be back. Thanks for inviting me, David, and thanks for coming here today. I'm excited to hop in.
So tell us a little bit. You're from Michigan.
Yep.
And you're now in California. Tell us about the journey a little bit, so we have some context on sort of the start and where you are right now.
Yeah, so I was born in Ohio, but my family moved to Southfield, Michigan when I was 4 months old. So grew up in Southfield, went to public schools there, K-12, and then after I graduated from high school, came here for college. I think for me, I came here and was like super excited to be at Michigan. Grew up around Michigan. A lot of my people that I admired growing up were alums, and so I was really excited to get here, and decided to study engineering. So I applied to the College of Engineering, and studied computer engineering. And the way that happened was just kind of, in some ways, an accident, but like such an awesome kind of blessing in disguise, because I wasn't necessarily like groomed to be an engineer. I did well in math and science historically, but didn't really know what engineering was. And I was telling David on the walk over, I didn't even know what a computer programming language was until my freshman year in college. And so in a lot of ways, freshman year, at the time the class was called EECS 100, and we started with like assembly language, and then we learned C, and then eventually C++. And I was academically a little bit behind because I didn't know what, like I had no idea what we were doing, but just kind of naturally was really interested in that as a course of study. And in some ways, I liked computer science and computer engineering because I felt like I didn't have to study for the exams. It wasn't like a memorization thing. It was really more about like how you thought, and that was intriguing to me. And so, but at the same time, it was hard. I probably worked harder at Michigan as an engineering student during my time here than I have ever in my life, like ever, hands down.
What did that look like? Is that meaning you're sleeping 2 hours a night? Or?
I lived in what was called the Media Union, is now called the Duderstadt Center. I lived there, like. I remember when I graduated.
In the corner with Erin's name
seriously,
on it.
like the entire staff knew me. It was like, it was like it was just embarrassing, like, because every night, like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., they were like, "Hey, Erin, how's class going today?" But that's kind of what it took, I wasn't in a position to really compete academically when I matriculated here. And so what it took to really get good grades was a lot of work, just to kind of catch up and then to do well. And so so for me, it was it was a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of all-nighters, but it, it was important to me to do well. And
what's driving you during that time? Are you thinking, hey, I want to go to the Silicon Valley and be the
I
next
didn't even
star?
know,
Right.
like, I didn't really know what it meant to be in Silicon Valley at the time. I think just a desire to do well. Like I knew I could compete. I knew I could compete at a really high level, or I just kind of, like the best thing about where I grew up was it was a cultivating environment that was great in terms of helping with my own self-confidence and me at least believing that I was smart. So if there was a delta in terms of like what I was prepared, it was just, or what I knew, it was just sheer preparation, right? It was just like, that was it. But I knew that like intellectually I could compete. And so, so for me, like I wanted to do well. I didn't know what Silicon Valley was. Google, I think, IPO'd my, right after I graduated from college, Google IPO'd. So Google was founded in like 98, 99, IPO'd in 2004, which was when I graduated. And so they may have recruited on campus, but Microsoft had like a significant presence. But they're in Redmond, Washington. And then all the other like, traditional engineering companies had presence on campus in terms of recruiting, but I didn't really know what Silicon Valley was. I knew about chips because of Intel, and Intel financed my scholarship. So I knew about like chips and hardware and like physical computer productions and like CPUs and microprocessing, but I didn't know about software as well. And a lot has happened over the past 10 years to change the way that software is really leveraged.
So what was, I want to talk a little bit more about the software development component in general, but the leap to get from here to there, what happened? Was it a person? Was it a job offer?
So after college, I went to Morgan Stanley and I did what's called algorithmic trading. So I designed algorithms embedded in Morgan Stanley's electronic trading applications. I was intrigued by Wall Street and just like the pace. So I interned there the summer before my senior year in college, and I was just blown away by the people that I met.
So you're thinking East Coast at this point.
So I was like, New York. I was 21, best summer of my life.
New York's a good city.
Yeah, and I could legally drink, and so it was it was awesome. So the goal at the time was to was like to learn about finance.
Yeah.
And it was kind of random, but the algorithmic trading at the time was a brand new field in Wall Street. There were still manual traders, and so it was like this burgeoning kind of new functional area in the bank and inside a large bank. So in some ways it was a startup inside of a large bank. I was the third person to join the team. I still have no idea why they hired me. So it was 2 VPs and then me, like fresh out of college. And I was just an engineer. I was programming Java. The algorithms we were writing were in Java, but I learned about finance. I took Series 7, 55, 63. Like I learned everything about trading.
And you passed them. Nice.
Fortunately. And then I did that for a couple years, and that was training ground and kind of opened up my eyes to business school. As a means of getting a graduate degree. So I knew I wanted to go back to grad school, but at the time I didn't know what. And everyone around me who I respected, similar to why I applied to Michigan, everyone around me at the time who I respected had MBAs from top institutions. And so that's kind of the route I took. And so while in business school, I began to learn about everything that was happening in Silicon Valley. And that was the game changer.
This is just water cooler talk, hanging out with friends.
This was water
Faculty.
cooler talk, hanging out with friends, faculty. But yeah, there was a professor. He taught a class called Competing with Social Networks. And so the way my business school worked, every day was a case. So it was a case method. It was 100% case method. And so every day in class was a case. And this class, every day was a different case on a social network. So we looked at Foursquare, we looked at Facebook, we looked at Twitter, we looked at Yelp. I mean, literally a social network every single day. And that class was kind of that critical juncture, which made me realize that what was happening in Silicon Valley at that moment was rare, and that I needed to be a part of what was happening there.
Why
Like
was it rare?
it still is. It's a rare moment in history.
What's happening? What's rare about it?
Oh, so many things. So, I think everything started to change in terms of leveraging just access to the internet and the way that software impacts our lives, probably around 2007. So prior to 2007, so like if you take a step back, so like the initial computer was built like, let's call it 75, 80 years ago in like the 40s and 50s. And at the time it was built for like the government, large governments, like World War II. The initial computer was built to kind of crack like codes. And it was all thought about like spying and espionage, et cetera. And then computers became more mainstream, more governments had access to them, but they were super expensive. Fast forward 60s and 70s, and then it was like corporations, but computers weren't leveraged on the consumer side until like the 80s and 90s, right? So introduction to the PC. Now people actually have computers in their household, and Bill Gates famously said there will be a computer on every desktop. But that penetration rate was still only like 1 billion people. So max 1 billion people at the time had
6th to 7th of the world population.
I mean,
at that
there
time,
are
right?
already more people who use Facebook on a monthly basis today than there were people who had computers
Right.
and access to the internet in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so the game changer was the smartphone. And so Apple launched the iPhone 2007, and now everyone has a computer in their pocket. And then, initially the price point's high, the price point begins to drop, the technology evolves, software evolves, the way that we leverage software on a daily basis evolves. And that creates a whole new world of opportunity for consumers and the way that we do business.
What's the opportunity?
So industries are being disrupted. One of a guy who I really respect in Silicon Valley, Mark Andreessen, famously wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal called "Software is Eating the World." And the basic premise there, and it's a premise on which he and a good friend of mine and co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz founded their venture capital firm, which is called Andreessen Horowitz. Software is eating the world, and the premise is that software will begin to disrupt every industry, healthcare, education, retail, media, every industry, the way that we do business. Software will disrupt everything, right? And so it already happened, right? It started happening in when I was in college, right? Like the music industry was completely disrupted. Napster, MP3s, file sharing. Et cetera. Again, the iPhone, the
Stuff
iPod.
that you take for granted, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Because
we used to pay $20 for a CD, 12 songs, one of which we listened to. It was just, the music industry was not an efficient business.
Yeah.
And software ate the music industry, and now the business is completely different. Like I stream all of my music now, right? RDO, Spotify, Pandora. I pay a subscription and I have access to however many songs I want, and I can only listen to the songs I want. So the unbundling of albums, like that's all a software-driven thing. And so so it's happened in music. It happened with newspapers, right? So like people now only consume their news online. The newspaper industry has been completely disrupted. And so this disruption is happening across the board. Retail is another example, right? Like we prefer now to buy everything via an e-commerce play versus a brick and mortar retail shop.
So right now you're Director of Product Management at Yahoo, and you've been, formerly at Quorapath, Twitter, and similar types of roles. And it's all really about software disrupting sort of the way we're thinking about life, not much less business. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's the process of developing a product in this kind of new environment where software basically eats the world kind of mentality?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way we think about product development at Yahoo and in the places I've worked in the past is really around like problems that people are experiencing. And at Yahoo, it's all about the problems you're experiencing in your daily lives. So we like to talk about it from the perspective of like your daily habits. And if you think about the products that Yahoo has, sports, weather, news, these are all daily habits, right? These are things that you do on a daily basis. When you wake up in the morning, you got to figure out what you're gonna wear. So you look at the weather, you catch up on the news. If you're a sports fan, maybe you're playing fantasy, you got to see how your team's performed. And so these are like driving your daily habits. And so we're thinking about problems that are being solved, or problems that we have. And generally like the most, the best startups, the best companies, the best products are solving problems, like core problems that people have in their lives. And you're seeing this also with the emergence of the on-demand economy, right? Like Uber is solving a problem for me on a consistent basis. I now use Google Shopping Express every single day. It's solving a problem for me because I hated going to the convenience store, and I literally have not been to I have not bought a dried goods in a brick and mortar store in a year. Like I just don't do it anymore. It's delivered, click a button on my phone, and it's delivered to my house. And so these are fundamental problems, right? So you start with the problem. What's the problem that we're trying to solve? And then what is the technical solution that can solve that problem? And then why is that better? Like why is that better than what exists today? And the best products generally are like 10x better than whatever you have today, right? So it's creating a new market, or it's 10 times as innovative or 10 times an improvement, at least, to what you had today, right? So like, you think about Google in the late 90s and early 2000s, Google was not the first search engine, right? There were a bunch of search engines at the time, but Google was 10 times better than any search engine that existed, and it was driven by the PageRank algorithm. Facebook, right, was not the first social network, but when it was founded in 2004, 2005, it was 10 times better. Snapchat, like messaging, ephemeral messaging via photos, like not necessarily the first mover, but 10 times better than what you had. WhatsApp, 10 times better. So all of these solutions are generally 10 to whatever X better than what exists today. So you think about solving these problems, you think about the core underlying technology, and then really it's about figuring out product market fit. So once you have your product, this is the solution. Is there really a market for that problem? Meaning, like, are there enough consumers in the world to drive the demand for that product? And sometimes a product is so awesome that you create a market, but without a solid market.
So how do you determine whether there's a solid market?
There are a lot of ways, but so some of it's just like sheer research, just understanding like what's if you are replacing or disrupting an existing pattern, then you can look at what the existing market is today, right? So like if you are an online source of news, then you can look at like the market for news consumers today, right? And then kind of add a multiple on what you think you would potentially add to that. What's the buying power of the consumer today? What is driving that revenue today? And so really understanding if there's a market for the product or the solution or the service that you've built. Uber's kind of interesting in this way because like prior to Uber or Lyft or Sidecar or Flywheel, they all kind of play in the same space. There wasn't so the private car model was not massively leveraged by regular people. Like, I never would have called a private car company. Maybe a taxi, yes, but not a private car company for myself. And so, the Uber just kind of came in, undercut the prices. Now it's a private car is significantly cheaper. It's easy to access via your smartphone. It's a seamless, delightful experience. And they create a new market for former non-consumers. And so they could have potentially looked at the market of existing private car companies before, but then you have to look at also like how many people will now consume that previously wouldn't have.
So there is a conversation you're having with potential and actual customers as you're going along and iterating on the product.
Absolutely. I mean, that's key. So, and that brings up a good point. Like once you launch a product, what the kind of language that we use all the time is launching a minimum viable product. So the least amount of features, super simple to just kind of test the idea. Like, is there demand? Does this stick? What's the engagement rate? How do you look at like the analytics or the extent to which people are really interested in what you've built or the service that you've built? And the best way to iterate rapidly is to just kind of build the simplest, stripped down, featureless product, and then constantly look at the data, but then also talk to your user base, right? And so at large companies like a Yahoo, we do usability studies where we literally bring in like regular people to come in and test our flows, and we do that before we launch any product. So we're doing ideally. We're every 2 weeks we're like testing flows with a brand new group of new users, and every single time, inevitably, no matter how smart I think I am or my group is, we're learning things. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit the mechanics of your job, what you do, what your team's like, and how that works.
Yeah. So functionally, I'm a product manager, and so to build a product, there are generally 3 types of functional roles. There are the engineers, the designers, and my role, which is a product manager. And usually there's like a 1 to 10 ratio, 1 product manager to 10 to maybe 15 engineers, and maybe 2 to 3 designers. So that's considered like a product team. And that product team, is responsible for the experience, or a set of features or a specific use case for a given product. And if it's a startup, they're responsible for the entire product. And so the way that these things generally work, I like to describe it as the product manager is responsible for thinking about the problem that you're solving, who you're solving it for, what is the problem, why is this problem important, who else is solving this problem, what's the competitive landscape, and when are we going to build this? When are we going to launch it? How long is it going to take, et cetera? The engineers think about how it should be built. What algorithms are you going to use? How will it scale? What APIs are you going to call? When? How do you maximize it? How do you ensure that there's no latency, that the user truly has a delightful experience? And then the designers think about how it's going to look. What color are the buttons? What sizes should they be? What's the overall user experience? What is the user seeing and experiencing? And so those kind of form a triangle for how a product is built.
So Erin's pretty cool because as you've been doing some of your questions out to the tag board, some of you have actually used Erin's handle and asked your questions out. She's responded to a couple. I want to give a little bit of space in this class period to actually have the peer leads guide us into some of the questions you've been asking. But before I do, let me ask one last question from me. Why Yahoo? I mean, you've been to some great companies. Why the decision to go to Yahoo now, this role and all that?
Yeah, I get asked that question all the time. So, a couple of things. One of my mentors at the very beginning of my career told me something that resonates with me today, and it's a tremendous piece of advice, and it's a piece of advice I would recommend you take heed to, which is that I should interview every year, no matter what, for a new job, a new opportunity. And the point there is one, even if I'm like tremendously happy, like can't imagine myself anywhere else, I should just interview externally at least once a year, 365 days, do it at least once. And so I've done that. And I found it to be invaluable advice even today. And the reason is because, one, it helps me really get a sense for what my market value is at all times. Like I always know, what my value is, what my market value is, and what the demand is. Two, I kind of consistently get a sense for the skill set that is important and how that is evolving from a market perspective. And then three, you kind of get the chance to talk to your competitors a little bit and get a sense for what their secret sauce is under an NDA. And so that's always been helpful, but in some ways it's not so great because I end up jumping around a lot. But the other thing that is important for every subsequent role that I've taken is I'm thinking about how do I maximize the experience, right? Like, what am I looking to gain from that experience? And when I've got it, are there additional things I can gain? And if so, how do I get those? If not, I should move on. At the time when I was considering the opportunity with Yahoo, I had a couple other offers, and the biggest selling point for me, and it was kind of this interesting space in my career because, I'm a woman, I'm African American, I am always the only person who looks like me in the room, always. And a lot of my mentors who were technical, who had similar backgrounds, who I looked up to and who I wanted to be like, excuse me, they were all men. And I had women mentors, but they weren't necessarily in a technical function. So they were, phenomenal, but, they were doing marketing or maybe HR. And so I was finding myself in these situations professionally where, socially, a mentor of mine might have invited me to like a social event in an informal environment. And so, I would naturally go. Generally, I'd be the most junior person in the room or in the, in the environment at their house or, backyard, whatever. And socially, it was more appropriate for me to be with the group of women, and generally they were the wives. Professionally, it was more advantageous for me to be with the men, and I was always in this consistent internal struggle. Wait, so do I do what is socially appropriate, or kind of do I gravitate towards the conversations that I think are additive to my career? And these were the little things that were happening that made me realize that I really needed to seek out and find a woman who had the technical chops, who was extremely credible, who I looked up to, who I can learn from, who I respected from a mentor perspective. And again, this is not to knock or devalue the mentorship relationships I have with women, with other women, because I have some tremendous mentors who are women. But so that said, that's the context. So then I got this offer from Yahoo, and Marissa called me. She's my CEO, Marissa Mayer, CEO. She called me, and we had a really phenomenal conversation about her career, what she's doing at Yahoo, her goals, her visions, and I want to be like her when I grow up. She is an amazing, amazing, amazing person. Phenomenal CEO, amazing leader. extremely technical, brilliant, and she happens to be a woman. And so I felt like for me, as I kind of think about the evolution of my career and what I was hoping to get out of my career, having an opportunity to learn directly from someone like her is probably worth my salary. Like, that's worth it. Like, that is worth it. And so for me, that was a deal breaker.
So my guess is there are some people out here that when they grow up wouldn't mind being like you.
Aim
so
higher.
I kind of want to open up the field to y'all. Would some of the peer leads come down? Because this is the time I'd like the peer leads to help sort of guide us into a group conversation on some of the questions that you've had. Come on down. And do you have a mic for the peer leads? Yeah, great. Cool. Just come on up here, guys.
Do I?
You can stay there. Come on up here. It's right here. Yeah, right up here. Yeah.
Should I stand up too then?
It's up to you. Yeah. If you prefer. Do you want me to? Yeah. All right. Go ahead, guys.
Okay, so I'm Fiona, the peer lead for Group 4, and Cole McConnell in my group says, how are you able to recognize past potential, and what about it made you leave such a high-up job at Twitter?
Sorry, say that one more time. Past potential?
Path.
Oh, path. So I was at Twitter before I went to Path. So I took the Twitter role after business school, and I joined Twitter when Twitter was maybe just south of 500 people. So in a lot of ways, it was still a startup, but definitely on a trajectory to IPO. And so I knew that was the path, but it was kind of in the in between. Wasn't quite a startup because the pathway to IPO was pretty clear, but wasn't a large company. And so the decision to go to Path was really around just the desire to be at a startup, to be at a company that was less than 50 people, to be a part of kind of the ground floor of something, and I just wanted to put my feet to the fire a little bit. I had learned a tremendous amount at Twitter and had a great experience there. But wanted to figure out if what I learned at Twitter, if I could apply it to another company, to a startup, and really kind of test my chops. And so that was the impetus for the decision there. And then I think, fortunately for me, things kind of worked out in a way where I, got opportunity to lead the team based on the experiences that I had at Twitter. And then I think once you kind of lead a team and things go well, and then that just kind of puts you on a certain trajectory, and the rest is history. I don't know, does that answer the question? Cool.
I'm Allie from Group 3, and Nathaniel McCannion asks what part of your undergrad experience at UMich was most influential in your professional career?
So many things. So I would say two things really come to mind. The first is, like I said, I worked harder. I literally worked harder here than I have. Like, my work ethic spiked, and it's just been like, I learned how to work hard when I came to Michigan. And so I think, like, that experience just gave me the confidence to believe that, like, I can outwork. Like, it's gonna be really hard to outwork me, and like, I built up that work ethic while I was here, and that was really instilled in me. And a lot of my friends like worked insanely as well, and so I think, like, I definitely built a work ethic and a lot of just like really good habits while I was here. The other thing I'll say is just like the academic rigor. I mean, I was, like, I came in not knowing anything about engineering, and I was, I built my technical chops here. And so I learned how to be an engineer here. I learned how to think like an engineer. I learned how to build software. And that degree and that educational experience is invaluable, and it's something that easily has been the one or two most beneficial things in my career ever since, right? So like, I'm not an engineer now. I'm a product manager by functional definition, but I work with engineers. So there's 60 engineers on my team. And so the best way to gain respect for my engineers is literally being able to speak the language, right? Like, I understand the technology. I understand the underlying aspects of the technology. So when it comes to figuring out what's a timeline to get a product built and shipped, I have a really good idea about what it takes. And so that means that my engineers and I can have a good conversation about that. And it just, like, in the room allows me to command a level of respect that I wouldn't have had if I didn't have the technical background.
Hi, Erin. So obviously you've moved around a lot since college. Amanda Egypts from my group, great question, was what's one thing you wish you would have done differently during that move around, or what's one thing you might want to do differently in the future?
Yeah. So the biggest thing I would do differently is probably go to Silicon Valley earlier. I am super envious of you guys right now, today. Like, oh gosh, I would give anything to like be in your shoes right now, because as soon as I graduate, I would hightail it out to Silicon Valley, San Francisco. I would join any sort of consumer web and consumer mobile company, and just learn all that I can. And like, the thing that I regret is that it just took me so long to get to Silicon Valley. It took me so long to kind of get out there. But in a lot of ways, like, that's been good for me too, because once I got there, I kind of had a chip on my shoulder, like, wow, I have some time to make up. Like, I need to catch up, which is kind of one of those self-motivators that I've kind of been leveraging for a long time. And so, but yeah, I think getting out to Silicon Valley earlier would have been tremendous. There's so much that's happening out there from an opportunity perspective, and it's a relatively new industry, right? Like, again, computers are 75 years old. So, so that means that, like, and that's compared to a financial industry that's like 200 years old. Like, to gain access and to do well there, I think is a lot easier if you're focused and driven and hardworking, which all of you obviously are, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And so to kind of break into that industry, I think is a lot easier than it is in any other industry in the world. And it's far more meritocratic.
Hello, Lorenzo Sabatini, Lori Saba 16 asks, working in a usually male-dominated industry, why do you think we are still lacking more women in tech today?
Yeah, we're lacking women, we're lacking diversity. It's a great question, and it's a super relevant question because a couple months ago, Google for the first time released their diversity numbers first, and then I think Facebook followed, and then the who's who of Silicon Valley essentially followed. And everyone released their diversity numbers, and across the board, every single company is not doing well, like, not at all. Not only do the employees they are not representative of the user base of these products, which is bad, but they're not representative of the population. And the case for diversity in the workplace and obviously academically has already been proven, right? Like, diverse teams lead to better solutions, period. And so it's a relevant question, and it's a super important question. I think the answer is hard, right? Which is why a lot of companies haven't really figured it out, and it's not for lack of effort or trying. I think a lot of it is historical, right? So I think it comes down to an access and exposure issue. I think that men, in a lot of ways, because of societal roles and functions, are exposed to engineering and software via video games or via the types of toys that men are predisposed to versus women. So that happens at an early age, and then it's like, who are your role models? Who's at this company? If I actually decide to pursue math and science, I think the stat is like most women and ethnic minorities select out of math and science by the 5th or 6th grade. So then it's like, if you're not even on that track, if you're not on the track to take algebra, at least in the 8th grade, and then you're not on a track to take calculus in high school, and then you get to college, and it's like, you're just not on the track, right? You're not gonna take calculus or whatever your first year, and you gotta take through Calc 4 as an engineer through differential equations. And so it's like, how do you even graduate then in a reasonable time frame, right? And so then it becomes this vicious cycle. And then if you actually do kind of make it through, it's like you start in the workplace and no one looks like you, and then that's really isolating and intimidating. And then you start to wonder if, like, wow, did everyone else figure it out but me? Why am I the only one who looks like me in this room right now? And so it's hard. And then there's like imposter type syndrome feelings. But I think that it is important. Regardless, I think it is clear that every company across Silicon Valley is realizing the extent to which it's important. And I think I know you're gonna begin to see some companies do really innovative things to increase the amount of diversity in the workplace. The reality is that women and ethnic minorities over-index on every social network across the board. And so if the people who are making these products aren't representative of the people who are using the products, then you have a problem. And so there's a real business case for increasing the diversity. But it all goes back to like this historical issue. So if I had to pick one solution, like if I were queen of the world, I would start attacking the problem at like 3rd grade. And I would just like really do all that I can to reinforce the importance of STEM education all the way through. I think it's your turn.
Oh, yeah. Right, so this is Wei from Group 1. One of my students, Syria Burry, is asking, for your current position, how much of information and knowledge that you use is learned from college?
Yeah, I mean, so anything technical I really learned initially in college. Now, obviously, like, the technology has changed. I didn't learn Java at Michigan. I learned Java my first job out of college, but I learned object-oriented programming at Michigan. So I think the technical foundation that I have was set here, and that I carry with me forever. There are a couple of things that happen outside of the classroom too that are important. I did a lot of student leadership activities while I was here, and so I really learned how to lead teams and how to lead people, like volunteer teams and efforts. And so I think that foundation was really set here from a leadership perspective. Those are probably the two. I mean, I talked about work ethic earlier, but those are probably the two things that I just kind of leverage and lean back on a day-to-day basis.
So for those of you that are using the Twitter handle, her Twitter handle, that's okay. Please continue doing
absolutely.
So.
Tweet to me at any time. I know I responded to as many as I could. I have so many more tweets to respond to, and so I'm gonna do all that I can to make sure I get back to you guys. Lots of good questions coming through.
So please do keep asking the questions. Add the hashtag #EHour, and feel free to come down and talk to Erin afterwards. Thanks. Let's give Erin a round of applause.
An undergrad here, there were myself and one other guy who got a company public out of my class in the engineering school, and the other guy's name was Larry Page.